Well, for more on the U.S. labor shortage, I'm joined now by Carol Spieckerman. She's president of Spieckerman Retail. Thanks for joining us.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you.
So as we know, Walmart is the largest private employer in the U.S., so it's always closely watched. It does continue to perform strongly amid the pandemic. So walk us through the highlights from its recent earnings report, as well as some of its latest decisions on things like masks and hiring.
Well, for Walmart to experience comp increases of 6% and e-commerce up 37%, that's pretty impressive given how mature Walmart's businesses are across all channels. But the real exciting number is the 20% uptick in non-grocery sales. Grocery retailers, including Walmart, have been basically trading margin for sales throughout the pandemic. There have been surges in those low margin categories like grocery, but then the higher profit categories, those discretionary categories that really drive the bottom line, those have been lagging. So the uptick in those categories is really good news for Walmart, and particularly as shoppers start returning to stores, because that's where a lot of those higher margin, more profitable categories really perform.
And obviously it does rely on having a good, solid workforce. And we know that the retail and fast food companies have said they're having a tough time filling some jobs post-pandemic. How concerning is this?
Well, I would say it's more of a concern for some than others. I mean, the elephant in the room really is that it's about worker pay. And for years, retailers said, oh, we can't afford to pay workers anymore, until they did, because they were forced into it. And now you see these other sectors of retail, like fast food restaurant, quick serve restaurants, actually competing against retailers that have decided to pay more. So in a lot of cases, what we're really talking about is a migration of employees between these different retail sectors, and also between the different players and their different pay structures. So it's really the hard truth going forward is that if you can't afford to pay workers a living wage, then you really don't have a viable business model.
So then talk about current recruitment practices. Which industries are doing a better job getting applicants?
Well, it's hard to generalize. I would say that there are some retailers that are doing a really good job of recruiting. And you look at a retailer like Aldi, for example, that global retailer, very value oriented. Yet anytime they open a store, they have hundreds of folks lining up to work. And that's because they pay well, they offer good benefits, and at the end of the day, that enhances retention, which also is really friendly to their bottom line. So there are some really compelling business models out there, even with value retailers, to where they're able to attract that talent.
Now, there have been some criticisms, this argument that the recent COVID benefits that people have received, that's what's stopping people from rejoining the workforce. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it really is too simplistic because and short-sighted, because these shortages were at work very, long before the pandemic hit. Certainly the pandemic made them worse, but retailers have been used to flexing up and down their workforces and doing it pretty seamlessly. But when they flexed down during the pandemic, a lot of those employees sought other options. Now that all of them are trying to flex up at the same time, of course, that creates a strain on trying to recruit talent.
And you touched on something important earlier about this really raising issues about poverty versus raising the minimum wage versus having, say, a living wage. Talk about the key issues surrounding each.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? My apologies.
Sure. A lot of people are looking at the differences now of these arguments about poverty versus raising the minimum wage versus having a living wage, what that means for small businesses and jobs in the future. Talk about the key issues surrounding this.
Well, what becomes difficult, sort of like Amazon has ruined it for everybody in terms of shipping and expectations in that regard. The more retailers step up, others tend to have to follow. So that really is a key linchpin, is for companies to step up, to show that it can be done, to show that you can pay a living wage, and then for others, frankly, in some cases, to be forced into following suit. So that's generally the way it falls, and I think that kind of a dynamic is at work right now.
Now, obviously, it's not just about the availability of jobs. You also need the infrastructure to support a lot of the people. We saw primarily women and minorities lost more jobs and had their businesses closed at a disproportionately higher rate. What needs to be done to really provide the sort of ecosystem that helps these people get back into the workforce?
Well, that's been an ongoing problem that's very difficult to solve. But the the new guidelines from the CDC, I think, are going to make a big difference not only in just the overall performance of retail, but also in the ability for women to get back into the workforce because they can send their kids to school and everything opens up. And I think those are just the fundamental underpinnings that have allowed folks to be in the workforce before the pandemic and that are going to, hopefully make it easier for them to re-enter the market once things start to open up again.
And just very quickly, in terms of the supply chain and things getting back to normal, any expectations at the moment?
The supply chain it's become really complicated. The good news is the pandemic has been a stress test for retailers, and so they've really learned how to be very agile, how to find alternative sourcing, and I think that they're pretty much ready for anything at this point. But there are still a lot of stresses on the supply chain. But I think that we're going to start to see those even out in the coming months, and particularly as demand increases and retail as a whole starts opening up.
All right, thank you so much for your insights. Carol Spieckerman there, President of Spieckerman Retail.